As a retired physician, I've spent a lifetime treating patients, observing the ebbs and flows of human nature, and helping families navigate through life's most challenging moments. Yet, even after decades of experience, there's one lesson that continually replays in my mind. The lesson that, as we grow older, everything changes, and nothing highlights this truth more than the evolving relationship between parents and their children. I've witnessed it countless times. The loving parent who, for years, has been a source of guidance, strength, and unwavering support suddenly finds themselves questioning their place in their children's lives. The bond that once seemed unshakable begins to fray, and before they know it, they are no longer the pillar of wisdom they once were. Instead, they are dismissed, ignored, or worse, made to feel like a burden. Have you ever experienced that shift? Perhaps it began subtly, with your advice being shrugged off or your opinions brushed aside. You may have noticed that your children, once so eager to spend time with you, now seem too busy, distracted, or indifferent. What once was a warm, reciprocal relationship has begun to feel cold, distant, and unappreciated. And then, there's the fear of being discarded, the fear of being left behind in a world that no longer seems to have a place for you. The emotional toll can be devastating. You've spent your entire life nurturing, protecting, and guiding them, but in return, you're met with disrespect, neglect, and sometimes even disdain. The pain is sharp, but what's more painful is the sense of helplessness that creeps in. As parents, we don't just want love from our children, we need respect, validation, and to feel that we still matter. But when that respect fades, it leaves a hole that nothing seems to fill. Now, I know what you're thinking. This is just a phase. They'll grow out of it, but what if it isn't just a phase? What if this is the natural progression of things, and the problem isn't with them, but with how we, as parents, allow this shift to happen? The reality is this: the relationship between parents and children is not a one-way street. It's a dynamic, ever-changing dance, and the moment we stop actively nurturing that relationship, it starts to wither. We might not even realize it at first, but slowly, we are losing our place in their lives. The very people we've spent a lifetime caring for are now treating us as if we're expendable. Let me share with you something I've learned over the years. It doesn't have to be this way. There is a way to regain your place in their lives, a way to earn back the respect and love that you deserve without resorting to arguments or confrontation. It's not about forcing them to listen or reminding them of all the sacrifices you've made. No, the path to regaining respect starts with you by making some simple but powerful changes in how you interact with them and, most importantly, how you treat yourself. I know this might sound like a daunting task, and you may feel like it's too late to make a change, but I assure you, it's never too late. As a doctor, I've seen patients recover from all kinds of physical ailments, many of which were thought to be irreversible. The same principle applies to relationships. Nothing is beyond repair if we're willing to put in the effort. In the following sections, I'll share with you the steps that I believe can help restore respect in your relationship with your children. These are not quick fixes, but long-term strategies that will transform the way you interact with your children, the way they perceive you, and most importantly, the way you view yourself. Before we dive into these steps, I'd like to invite you to subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. By subscribing, you'll be supporting the creation of more videos like this one, and I'll be able to continue sharing my knowledge and experience with you. Your support is what keeps this channel going and motivates me to create more valuable content. Now, let's pause for a moment and reflect on your own relationship with your children. Do you feel that shift happening? Or perhaps it's already happened and you're wondering how to get it back? If you're ready to take action, I promise these steps will guide you toward rebuilding that connection. But before we move forward, I have a question for you, something to make you think about where you are in your relationship with your children right now. I'd love for you to leave a comment below with your answer. Here's the question. Do you think your relationship with your children is built more on respect, or is it based on their need for you, a respect, be need? Please comment with either or B, and let's start a conversation about what makes a truly healthy parent-child relationship. Your answer will help you reflect on where you stand and help me understand what you're most looking for in these videos. As a retired doctor with decades of experience, I've seen a lot in my time: life's ups and downs, the twists of fate, the surprises that come when we least expect them. But there's one lesson that stands out, one that I have seen time and time again, especially as I reflect on my own life and career. It's about something that most parents don't even realize they're doing, and it's something that slowly but surely erodes the foundation of respect between them and their children. I'm talking about chasing their approval. You see, as parents, we spend years giving our all to our children. We give them our time, our energy, and our unwavering support. We sacrifice our own needs for theirs, hoping that by doing so, they will see just how much we care for them. We want to be their rock, their guide, their source of wisdom. But somewhere along the way, in our eagerness to help, we start to lose ourselves. We begin to live for their approval, to seek their validation for everything we do. I've witnessed this in many of my patients' parents who've spent so much of their lives sacrificing for their children, only to find that when they grow older, they no longer command the same respect they once did. They find themselves pleading for acknowledgement, bending over backwards to please their children, and never once stopping to ask themselves, what do I need? What do I want? This is a dangerous cycle, one that can quietly slip into the fabric of our relationships without us realizing it. It's not that we don't love our children. Of course, we do. It's not that we don't want to help them. Naturally, we do, but the moment we begin to prioritize their needs over our own self-respect, we lose something incredibly important, our own sense of value. Let me explain this from the perspective of my many years in medicine. When I was a practicing doctor, I often saw patients who, despite all the care and attention they received, never truly took charge of their own health. They'd visit me time and time again, asking for prescriptions, for quick fixes, for band-aid solutions to deeper problems. But they didn't want to make the necessary changes to improve their health in the long term. Why? Because they were focused on temporary fixes, just as many parents focus on temporary solutions to gain approval from their children. Imagine a parent who constantly says yes to their child, even when it's inconvenient, even when it's at the expense of their own well-being. Perhaps they give in to their children's demands without setting boundaries, or they avoid confrontation at all costs, fearing that if they assert themselves, they'll lose their place in their child's life. This parent becomes a mere shadow of who they once were, a person who gives but never receives. The truth is, this constant pursuit of approval doesn't bring us closer to our children. Instead, it pushes us further away. When we live to please others, especially our children, we're teaching them a dangerous lesson. We're telling them that their happiness and satisfaction are more important than our own, and in doing so, we inadvertently place ourselves in a position of weakness. And this, my friends, is where the shift begins. I want you to think about this for a moment. How many times have you said yes when you wanted to say no? How many times have you sacrificed your own time, your own desires, just to keep the peace or to make sure your children are happy? The truth is, your children aren't expecting you to be perfect, to give everything without question, or to sacrifice your own happiness for theirs. What they really want is to see you as someone who respects themselves, someone who has boundaries, someone who knows their own worth. I remember a patient of mine, Charlotte, a woman in her late 60s, who came to me for advice. Charlotte had spent her entire life taking care of her children, giving them everything she had. She was always there for them, always putting their needs first. But as they grew older, something changed. They became more distant, less responsive to her calls, and they rarely asked for her opinion anymore. Charlotte was devastated. She spent weeks reflecting on everything she had done for them, questioning where she had gone wrong. When I asked her about her relationship with her children, she began to admit something that struck me deeply. "I've always tried to please them," she said. "I've done everything I could to make sure they never felt disappointed in me." But as she spoke, I could see the toll it had taken on her. She had spent her life trying to make her children happy, but in doing so, she had neglected her own needs. She had lost her sense of self, and in return, her children had lost their respect for her. Charlotte's story is not unique. It's a story I've heard countless times over my years in practice. It's the story of parents who give and give without ever asking for anything in return. They end up drained, feeling unappreciated and misunderstood. The problem isn't that they haven't done enough, it's that they've done too much without ever stopping to consider what they need. The key to regaining respect is not about giving more. It's about giving wisely, about setting boundaries, about saying no when you need to, and about recognizing that your needs are just as important as your children's. It's about living with integrity, not seeking validation through self-sacrifice. So, if you find yourself constantly chasing your children's approval, ask yourself, why are you doing this? Are you looking for their love, or are you seeking something deeper: respect, acknowledgement, and validation for who you are, not just what you do for them? To change this pattern, you must first stop living for their approval. You must stop measuring your worth by their responses, their needs, or their expectations. Instead, measure your worth by how you treat yourself, by how you honor your own feelings, and by how you set and enforce healthy boundaries. I've seen firsthand how this shift can transform a relationship. It's not about turning away from your children, it's about turning back toward yourself. When you stop chasing their approval, you free yourself from the constant pressure to please. And when you start respecting yourself, your children will begin to see you in a new light. They will see you as a person who values themselves not just as a parent, but as an individual with their own identity, their own needs, and their own dignity. It's never too late to make this change. It's never too late to reclaim your place as a respected figure in your family's life. And it all starts with you stopping the chase for approval and learning to value yourself once more. As a retired physician with a lifetime of experience, I've learned that some of life's most profound lessons don't come from medical textbooks or even from years of practice. They come from the stories of people who've lived through the inevitable struggles of life, the struggles that shape who we are, the struggles we must confront when things don't go as planned. One of the most significant lessons I've learned over the years is this: when it comes to regaining respect from those you love, especially your children, arguing is never the solution. In my years of practice, I've seen countless families torn apart by arguments that never seem to resolve anything, only to deepen the wounds. Parents, in particular, have a tendency to believe that if they argue their case hard enough, if they raise their voice and make their point clear enough, they can force their children to respect them. But that's not how it works. And trust me, I've seen it over and over again. When parents argue with their children to regain respect, they only push them further away. I remember one of my patients, Richard, an older man who had spent his entire life working in a high-pressure career. He was used to being in control, used to being the one who made the decisions, the one who held the answers. But as his children grew into adults, he noticed something troubling. His children no longer listened to him. They began dismissing his advice, belittling his opinions, and treating him as though he were irrelevant. Richard was hurt. Of course, he had given so much to his children, sacrificed so much for their well-being. And yet, they were treating him like a stranger. In an attempt to regain their respect, Richard did what most parents would do. He argued. He argued about the choices they were making. He argued about the way they treated him. He argued about his years of sacrifice. He expected them to see reason, to understand that he knew better, to give him the respect he had earned through years of hard work and love. But all he received in return was frustration. His children shut down. They didn't listen. They grew more distant. The harder he argued, the further they pulled away. It wasn't until Richard came to see me, frustrated and defeated, that I finally understood what had gone wrong. Richard, in his desperation to regain the respect of his children, had forgotten the most crucial thing. Respect isn't earned through arguments. Respect isn't forced. Respect is cultivated, it's nurtured, and it's given freely when it is felt. I shared with Richard a simple truth. Arguing with your children won't make them respect you. In fact, it will likely have the opposite effect. When you argue with someone, you're not showing them that you're worthy of respect. You're showing them that you're desperate for it. You're lowering yourself to a level where the only thing that matters is winning the fight, not rebuilding the relationship, and that's not how respect is built. It's built through quiet strength, through leading by example, and through showing others that you don't need to fight to be heard. Leading by example is one of the most powerful tools you have in regaining respect from your children. Think about it. When we argue, we're often coming from a place of fear that we're losing our place in our children's lives, fear that we're being dismissed, that we're becoming irrelevant. But what if, instead of fearing disrespect, we embraced self-respect? What if, instead of fighting to be heard, we simply spoke with quiet confidence and dignity? What if, instead of raising our voices in anger, we stood firm in our own integrity, calmly and confidently asserting our boundaries? This is what leading by example looks like. It's not about winning a battle of words. It's about living a life that speaks for itself. When you demonstrate self-respect, when you live with dignity and grace, when you show your children that you are someone who values yourself, they will begin to see you in a new light. They will start to respect you not because you demanded it, but because you demonstrated it through your actions. Let me share with you another story, this one about Susan, a woman in her early 60s who had raised her children with love and care. As they grew older, however, she began to notice that they were no longer listening to her. They started making decisions without consulting her, dismissing her advice as outdated or irrelevant. At first, Susan tried to reason with them, to argue her points, to remind them of how much she had done for them. But the more she argued, the more they withdrew. Her attempts to regain their respect only deepened the rift between them. One day, after a particularly heated argument with her son, Susan came to see me. She was exhausted, emotionally drained, and full of self-doubt. "Why don't they listen?" she asked. "Why don't they respect me anymore? I've always been there for them. I've given everything." I asked Susan a simple question. "Have you been listening to them?" She looked at me, confused. "I'm the one who's been trying to talk to them. They never listened to me." I nodded and explained. Respect is a two-way street. If you want your children to listen to you, you must first listen to them. And if you want them to respect you, you must respect yourself enough to stop arguing and start leading by example. Show them the strength in silence. Show them the power in listening. Show them that you don't need to prove anything to them because you already know your worth. Susan took that advice to heart. She stopped arguing. She stopped trying to convince her children that she was right. Instead, she started listening more, giving her children space to express their thoughts and opinions. She found ways to show her love and wisdom without demanding anything in return. Slowly but surely, her children began to respond. They started seeking her advice again, respecting her opinions once more. Susan didn't win their respect through arguments. She won it through quiet strength, through modeling the respect she wanted to receive. And that, my friends, is the power of leading by example. When you stop arguing, when you stop fighting for respect, you begin to show others the respect you've always had for yourself. This is how respect is earned, not by force, but by presence, not by words, but by actions. So, if you're struggling to regain the respect of your children, I urge you to stop arguing. Let go of the need to prove your point. Instead, focus on demonstrating the respect you want to receive. Lead by example, speak with dignity, stand firm in your values. And, most importantly, remember this: your silence, your grace, and your strength will speak louder than any argument ever could. In all my years of practice, one truth has become painfully clear. The most profound issues in life are often those we don't want to face, especially when they involve our own emotional well-being. As a doctor, I've always believed that true healing comes not just from the physical care we provide, but from the emotional space we create for ourselves to heal. And yet, as I reflect on my own life, I've come to realize that one of the hardest lessons we must learn, especially as we age, is the importance of withdrawing emotional dependence. This lesson didn't come to me easily, nor did it come from any textbook. It came from the families I've seen, the people I've cared for, and, if I'm being honest, some of my own experiences. For much of my career, I saw patients who, no matter how well I treated their ailments, couldn't seem to heal emotionally. There was something deeper, something I couldn't treat with medicine, a dependence on others, especially their children, for emotional validation. It was a cycle I began to recognize, one that caused more harm than good. I've seen it countless times, especially with older patients' parents who've given so much of themselves to their children, yet, as they age, find themselves desperately clinging to the very people they spent their lives nurturing. They want their children to affirm their worth, to assure them that they still matter, that they're still needed. But here's the reality. When we depend too heavily on others for our emotional fulfillment, we put an immense amount of pressure on them. It's a pressure they may not even know how to handle, and more often than not, it's a pressure that drives them away. I remember one patient, Eleanor, a woman in her 70s who came to me for help, feeling increasingly disconnected from her adult children. Eleanor had spent her entire life making sure her children were taken care of, giving them the best she could, sacrificing her own dreams for theirs, and putting their happiness above all else. But now, as her children had grown, moved away, and started their own families, Eleanor found herself alone. Her children didn't call as often, they didn't visit as frequently. And when they did, they seemed distracted, impatient, as if they had more important things to do than spend time with her. At first, Eleanor tried to fill the void by reaching out more, calling them constantly, reminding them of how much she missed them, how lonely she felt. She thought that if she kept showing them how much she needed them, they would respond, but instead, they became more distant. They stopped returning her calls as quickly, and when they did speak, their conversations were brief and perfunctory. She was left feeling more isolated than ever. When I first saw Eleanor, I could see the frustration and the sadness in her eyes. She was lost, searching for something outside of herself to make her feel valued. But it was clear to me what she was looking for, what she needed most, wasn't coming from her children, it needed to come from her. Her happiness, her sense of worth, couldn't depend on the validation of others, especially not her children. It's a difficult pill to swallow, I know. As parents, we dedicate ourselves to our children, hoping that our love and sacrifices will be enough to maintain a connection, that when we're older, they'll return that love and care. But the truth is, we cannot know, we must not rely on them to fulfill our emotional needs. Here's why. Emotional dependence puts an unfair burden on our children. They are not our emotional caretakers. They are not responsible for our happiness, nor should they feel that they are. If we rely too heavily on them for our sense of self-worth, we are not only doing ourselves a disservice, but also forcing them into a position where they may feel overwhelmed, guilty, or even resentful. It's a dynamic that breeds tension, and it weakens the very bond we are trying to preserve. Think of it this way. When you depend on someone else for emotional validation, you become a prisoner to their responses. You are waiting for them to call, waiting for them to visit, waiting for them to say the right thing to make you feel loved and valued. But that's no way to live. It's not healthy for you, and it's certainly not healthy for your relationship with them. You must take back your emotional independence for your own well-being and for theirs. I shared this with Eleanor, and at first, she resisted the idea. But if I don't reach out to them, she said, won't they forget about me? Won't they think I don't care? I understood her fear, but I told her that the opposite was true. The more she reached out from a place of need, the more she was unintentionally pushing her children away. They were seeing her as someone who could not stand on her own emotionally, and as much as they loved her, they were starting to feel like they were walking on eggshells, trying to meet her emotional needs. The key wasn't in demanding more from them, but in giving herself the space to fill her own emotional cup. I encouraged Eleanor to find new activities for herself, things that didn't rely on her children. She joined a book club, reconnected with old friends, and even started volunteering at a local community center. Slowly, she began to focus more on her own happiness, her own fulfillment. And as she did, something remarkable happened. Her children began to reach out to her more. They saw her as someone with a full life, someone who didn't need them to validate her worth. They respected her independence and, in turn, their relationship with her grew stronger. It was a powerful lesson for Eleanor, and it's one that I've seen play out time and time again. When you withdraw your emotional dependence on your children, you give them the freedom to respect you not out of obligation, but because they see you as an independent, strong person who can stand on their own. You are not a burden, but a source of strength in their lives. I know it's not easy to let go of that dependence. It's difficult to shift from a place of needing your children to a place where you can find fulfillment on your own. But it's one of the most important steps in maintaining a healthy, respectful relationship with them. The less you rely on them to fill the emotional void, the more they will be able to respect you as a person, not just a parent. So, if you find yourself constantly looking to your children for emotional support, ask yourself, are you giving them the freedom to live their own lives? Are you allowing them to see you as someone who can stand independently, someone who doesn't need to be constantly validated by them? If not, it's time to start focusing on your own emotional well-being. Find your own passions, your own joys, your own sense of purpose. When you do, you'll discover that the bond with your children becomes stronger, more meaningful, and more fulfilling. The path to emotional independence isn't easy, but it's one worth taking. And when you take it, you'll find that the love and respect you've always wanted from your children will flow back to you not because you demanded it, but because you earned it. As a retired physician, I have seen my fair share of families struggling with one of the most delicate issues that arise as children grow into adulthood: the inability to set and maintain healthy boundaries. The subject of boundaries may sound simple at first, almost like a cliché, something you think everyone should already understand. But let me tell you, from decades of seeing families torn apart and relationships strained, the failure to establish clear boundaries can silently destroy the connection between parents and children. You see, it's not just about drawing a line in the sand. It's about knowing where you stand as a person and ensuring that others, especially your children, understand and respect that position. The act of setting boundaries is not a rejection of love or a lack of care. In fact, it's a profound expression of respect for both yourself and for the relationship you share with your children. When I look back at my time as a doctor, I can recall so many families where the absence of boundaries was the root cause of much of the pain. I remember Henry, a widowed father in his 70s, whose children, though grown and well-established, treated him as if he were invisible, as if his opinions no longer mattered. Every time he tried to speak up, his voice was drowned out by dismissive comments or ignored entirely. At first, Henry didn't say anything. He thought it was just a phase. Perhaps his children were busy, distracted by their own lives. But the months turned into years, and nothing changed. In fact, it only got worse. They interrupted him when he spoke, belittled his thoughts, and made decisions without consulting him. Henry didn't know how to react. His frustration built up until he finally broke down and confronted them. But instead of getting through to them, the confrontation only caused more tension. His children were defensive and confused. "Why are you making such a big deal about this, Dad?" They asked. "We're just trying to help. You've always been so easygoing." But Henry wasn't being easygoing anymore. The problem wasn't that he was difficult, it was that he had let his children walk all over him, without ever voicing how it hurt him. For years, he had kept quiet, allowing them to dictate the terms of their relationship. His silence wasn't peace, it was surrender. When Henry came to me, exhausted from this emotional tug-of-war, I knew what the issue was. It wasn't that his children didn't love him, it was that they didn't respect him. And they couldn't respect him because he hadn't respected himself enough to set boundaries. They had grown used to taking him for granted because he had never drawn a line, never made it clear what he would or wouldn't tolerate. Setting boundaries can be a frightening thing, especially with the people you love. The fear of rejection, of conflict, or of making your children feel hurt or angry can stop many of us from setting the boundaries we need. But the truth is, if you don't set boundaries, you leave yourself vulnerable to being treated in ways that you don't deserve. And ultimately, that only weakens the relationship. Boundaries aren't about control, they're about teaching others how to treat you. When we don't set boundaries, we're telling others that it's okay to treat us in any way they choose. And when it comes to your children, this is especially dangerous because, over time, they may start to lose respect for you. They'll come to see you not as an equal, but as someone whose feelings don't matter. And that can lead to resentment not just from you, but from them as well. But when you set boundaries, something remarkable happens. You start to take control of your life again. You start to reclaim your dignity, your peace, and, ultimately, your place in the family. When you say, "This is where I stand," you teach your children not only how to treat you, but also how to treat others. You show them that respect is not a one-way street, it's a two-way exchange. Let me tell you a story about Margaret, a woman I know in her early 60s. Margaret had always been a people pleaser. She was the type of mother who would drop everything for her children, no matter what they asked. Over the years, her children came to expect this kind of behavior, taking it for granted that she would always be there to pick up the pieces. But as Margaret got older, she began to feel drained. She no longer had the energy to give as freely as she once did, and her health was beginning to suffer. Still, her children continued to call on her for help, often without any consideration for her well-being. One day, Margaret reached her breaking point. She called me, distraught, after yet another request from her son. "I don't know how to say no anymore," she confessed. "I've always done everything for them, and now I feel like I'm losing myself." I could hear the exhaustion in her voice. She had been giving so much of herself for so long that she had forgotten how to take care of her own needs. "I knew what had to be done, Margaret," I said gently. "It's time to set boundaries. Not because you don't love them, but because you do. Your children need to see that you are a person, not just a caretaker. And they need to understand that your time, your energy, and your well-being are just as important as theirs." It wasn't easy for Margaret to say no to her children, but over time, she learned how to assert herself. She started to voice her needs and set limits on what she was willing to do. At first, her children were resistant. They didn't understand why she wasn't always available. But as Margaret remained firm, something remarkable began to happen. Her children started to respect her more. They saw that she wasn't just the person who helped them with everything. They saw her as a strong, independent woman who had her own needs and desires. And as a result, their relationship grew stronger. They learned to value her time, and in return, she found a new sense of fulfillment in her own life. Margaret's story is a powerful reminder of how important it is to set boundaries in our relationships. Without them, we allow others to take control of our time, our energy, and our emotional well-being. But when we set clear boundaries, we regain our sense of self. We show others how to treat us, and we invite them to respect us not out of obligation, but out of a genuine understanding of who we are and what we need. I know that setting boundaries can be difficult, especially when it feels like you're risking conflict or rejection. But the reality is, if you don't set them, you risk losing the very respect you're trying to protect. You can't demand respect without first teaching others how to respect you. And the first step in that process is setting clear, firm boundaries and enforcing them gently, but with conviction. In the end, it's not about creating distance. It's about creating a healthier, more balanced relationship. When you set boundaries, you create space for mutual respect, understanding, and love to flourish. And that, my friends, is how you reclaim your place in the family, not as someone who is constantly giving, but as someone who is respected and valued for who you are. In my many years as a physician, I've treated countless patients, watched them grow older, and seen them navigate through the inevitable challenges of aging. Yet, as I've grown older myself, one lesson has become more and more clear to me. The foundation of every healthy relationship, whether with family, friends, or even ourselves, is built on one simple, yet profound truth: the power of self-respect. As a doctor, I've spent most of my career tending to the physical ailments of my patients, and I've always believed that true healing goes beyond just treating the body. It involves understanding the mind, the emotions, and the deep-rooted beliefs we carry about ourselves. And if there's one thing I've observed over and over again, it's that when people lose their self-respect, their entire world begins to crumble. It may start as a small crack, barely noticeable to others, but over time, that crack widens, affecting every area of their life. I've watched as some of my patients, especially those in their later years, have lost their sense of self-worth. As their bodies age and their lives change, they begin to believe that they no longer matter, that they no longer have anything of value to offer. Their children, who once relied on them, no longer seem to need them. Their friends move on with their lives, and they are left feeling forgotten, irrelevant, and insignificant. But what I have come to understand, what I've learned from both my patients and from my own experience, is this: when we lose our self-respect, we lose the very thing that allows us to connect with others in a meaningful way. It's a painful truth, isn't it, to realize that the respect we so desperately seek from others must first come from within. We cannot expect to be valued by those around us if we do not value ourselves. This isn't about arrogance or selfishness, it's about recognizing our own worth, our own dignity, and our own ability to stand firm in who we are. Without self-respect, We become vulnerable. We become desperate for validation, approval, and acknowledgement from others, and in doing so, we give away our power. I remember one of my patients, David, a man in his mid-60s, who came to me struggling with the idea of retirement. David had spent his entire career as a high-ranking executive, always in control, always at the top of his game. But when he retired, he found himself lost, adrift in a world where his identity was no longer defined by his job title or the admiration of his colleagues. He turned to his children for comfort, but they were busy with their own lives. He sought validation from his peers, but they too had moved on. David began to feel irrelevant, as if he had nothing to offer anymore. I watched as his self-esteem dwindled. He stopped taking care of himself, stopped engaging with his passions, and fell into a deep sense of loneliness. He had forgotten that his worth was not tied to his job or his ability to please others. His worth, like all of ours, came from within. It came from his character, his experiences, his ability to give and love unconditionally, and it came from his self-respect. One day, during a conversation, David admitted something to me that stuck with me. "I don't know who I am anymore," he said, his voice heavy with despair. "I've spent my whole life taking care of others, doing everything for them. But now that they don't need me, I feel useless." I looked at him and said, "David, you're not useless. You are valuable. But to see that, you need to first recognize your own worth. The respect you're seeking from others must come from within. When you respect yourself, when you understand your own value, that is when others will truly begin to respect you." At first, David was skeptical, but over time, he began to change. He started by taking small steps. He reconnected with old hobbies, he started volunteering, and most importantly, he stopped waiting for his children to fulfill his emotional needs. Slowly but surely, his self-respect began to rebuild. His relationships with his children improved, not because he demanded more from them, but because he was now a man who respected himself, who valued his own time, his own energy, and his own presence. David's story is just one example of how the power of self-respect can transform a person's life. When we stop looking outward for validation and start looking inward, we reclaim our power. We no longer need to prove our worth to anyone, we simply know it. And that is when the world around us starts to respond differently. People begin to see us for who we truly are, not as someone seeking their approval, but as someone who already knows their own value. I know that it's not easy, especially as we grow older and the world around us changes. The relationships we once relied on may no longer be the same, and the roles we once played may no longer be relevant. But that doesn't mean we have lost our worth. It simply means it's time for us to rediscover it, to embrace who we are, who we have always been, and who we can still be. Our self-respect doesn't depend on anyone else, it depends on us. It depends on our ability to stand firm in our own beliefs, to value our own time, and to recognize that we are deserving of love, respect, and happiness just as much as anyone else. As a doctor, I've spent my career helping people heal physically, but the most important healing is the kind that comes from within. Self-respect is not something that can be given to us by others. It's something we must cultivate ourselves, and when we do, it changes everything. It changes the way we see ourselves, the way others see us, and the way we navigate through the world. So, I urge you to look within, look at yourself with the eyes of compassion and understanding. Recognize your worth, your dignity, and your power. And once you do, you'll find that the respect you've always wanted will come naturally, not because you asked for it, but because you've earned it. The power of self-respect is the most valuable tool we have, and it's never too late to embrace it.